One of the strangest insults aimed at women today is the phrase modern women. Okay? Because every woman alive today is a modern woman. So, what do people actually mean when they use that term? Because modern isn't a personality trait, it's a time period. So, why is it really an insult, okay, to call a woman of today a modern woman? Okay. And I see this a lot online. I see so many kind of videos, lives happening on TikTok, etc., where they're talking about whether modern single women are marriage material. And I think we need to break this down because it's utterly ridiculous to me. And we need to examine the words themselves even before we even begin to answer that question. Because embedded within the question is a number of assumptions, okay, that often go completely unchallenged. Okay, what do we mean by modern and what do we mean by marriage material? And actually, who gets to decide, quite frankly? So, okay, what does modern actually mean? So she's a modern woman. Modern women are difficult. Modern women don't want marriage. Modern women are independent. But modern simply means contemporary. Yeah, it means you exist now. You're living today. If women in the 1960s were modern compared to women in the 1900s. Women in the 1900s were modern compared to the women in the 1800s. Women alive in 2075 will be modern compared to women living today. Yeah. So modern is not a personality trait and it's not a moral category. It just means today, right now, at the moment. Okay. It doesn't mean good, better, superior, more useful. And I think that's the key here, isn't it? Women are changing our utility. So, of course, now we're modern because we're not as useful as we used to be to patriarchy. We're not as useful and compliant with misogyny as we used to be, right? And actually, modern and traditional are often the two things compared to one another. Traditional just means customs, beliefs, rituals that are carried over time and passed down. Tradition does not mean better, superior, or more healthy. This is why we can't allow ourselves to be bamboozled. The words have meanings and connotations. So when they compare the traditional woman to the modern woman, traditional does not mean better. She might, the traditional woman, okay, and according to whose traditions? Who gets to decide what traditions are valuable and meaningful and which ones aren't? Yeah, because one culture will have traditions that another culture won't. So again, just saying someone's a traditional woman does not imply she is a kinder woman, doesn't imply that but what it does imply in the context of marriage is that she's more useful to the way things have been done. She's more useful to the way, however, whatever the way is, that a man wants things to be done in a family and in a marriage. Or even a woman may subscribe to traditional values. Like, it's all quite empty when you look at what tradition actually means and what modern actually means, right? It just means current. I had to go and look at myself again in the dictionary because I thought, am I imagining things here? There is no moral definition or connection to the word modern or even traditional. Neither of them have anything to do with morality, like I say, and the value of a woman. But, like I say, the utility, the way patriarchy can use you as a woman, now that has and is changing, right? So So if modern simply means existing now, then every woman alive today is a modern woman, regardless of whether or not she's a wife or not, regardless of whether or not she's a stay-at-home wife or not, regardless of whether or not she's a stay-at-home mother. Okay? So this includes married women, stay-at-home mums, religious women, traditional women, child-free women, corporate executive women, women who want 5 children, women who want no children, women who have no children. They're all modern women because they're all living right now, currently, in the modern world. So clearly, yeah, what people often mean is that it's a woman who does not accept any and every tradition, and specifically traditions that are wrapped around authority structures, where the woman has no power and has very little authority. Okay? Now we're getting somewhere when we really listen to what is being said and implied when women are labeled as modern women. And it's often in connection to the fact that women may be choosing or opting out of marriage, opting out of motherhood, or delaying either or both of those things. Okay? And that's why the label has so much emotional weight. You'll see women saying, oh, I'm a traditional woman. Well, that just means you've accepted certain traditions in your culture. And a lot of those traditions, funny enough, when we look at them, they are traditions that are quite restrictive, contained, narrow in terms of womanhood, femininity, and even motherhood. Yeah? These words are often deliberately misused, and they're used to divide women in terms of how women see themselves, but then also how they start to measure each other. And then on from that, how women start to position themselves in order to be chosen and selected by men. It is male-centered, in fact. Yeah, because tradition does not mean healthy. It doesn't mean it's fair. Yeah? It doesn't mean that people were safe. It doesn't mean that people had internal peace. It doesn't mean that people were content, that they were satisfied. A lot of traditions are harmful. This is one thing about me coming from a culture where tradition. So what? If the tradition, okay, does not produce healthy outcomes, I'm not interested. You can keep your tradition. You can keep your customs. You can keep your rituals. If they are not things that produce healthy outcomes for all, if they are not mutually fulfilling, if they are not dignifying, edifying, respectful, you can keep your traditions. I don't mind. I don't mind not being classified and regarded as a traditional woman because I do not accept just any and every tradition because it's been done over and over again, and that's the way that's irrelevant to me. What is healthy? What is dignifying? What is mutually fulfilling for all? What is equitable? Yeah? Because my thing is, the question should not be, is it traditional? The question should be, who benefits from this? Who bears the cost? Yeah? Does it still make sense today? Yeah? Really and truly, traditional and modern are not opposites. Most people actually, if we're honest, are a mixture of both. Anyway, yeah, we pick and choose what modernity we want to embrace and what traditions we may want to keep, because traditions, okay, can be meaningful. A lot of people's history, their culture, their lineage is steeped in tradition. So there are some traditions that people really love and feel very deeply connected to that can be positive for all. And there are some traditions that simply are not. Yeah, when you think about, foot binding in China, that is a tradition. But is that healthy? Was it safe and fulfilling for all? No, women bore the cost of that. Women bore the cost of that. There are many traditions around the world, okay, where women are harmed because of tradition. I remember having a conversation with somebody who I went on a couple of dates with. He was talking about certain traditions from his culture that were rather distasteful and disrespectful. I let him know that. I would not be acquiescing or submitting to those traditions because they are distasteful. They are undignified. They're disrespectful to me as a woman. Well, that didn't go down well, which was fine with me, right? He, funny enough, said, "Oh, yeah, it's because you were brought up in the UK." I said, "It doesn't matter where I was born. I've got sense. I've got sense and self-respect, funny enough. So it really doesn't matter where I was born. That's not going to run with me, right?" And this is the thing. Women who are alive now get to weigh up whether a tradition is respectful, is dignifying, is healthy for them too. And they get to opt out. They get to say, this isn't for me. Now, if that means that a man doesn't want you, well, you have to decide. You have to decide. Yeah, but most women may want marriage, which is kind of tradition. That's tradition, right? But they want some financial independence, which is viewed to be modern. Yes, some women may want children, but they don't want to do all of the domestic and childcare labor. Yes, some might be religious. Some people are still religious for various reasons. But they want, for example, some bodily autonomy. Human beings aren't kind of fixed and rigid in reality. Okay, so we need to get very clear about this. And then also, what do we mean by marriage material? This one always makes me chuckle. Historically, marriage material for women meant something very specific. You have to be obedient, submissive, agreeable, sexually compliant, domestic and domesticated, self-sacrificing, economically dependent, and focused on family above self. That really is what traditional marriage looks like for a woman. So, in other words, marriage material was often defined according to how effectively a woman could fulfill the expectations attached to the role of a wife. But that raises another question, doesn't it? Marriage material for whom? Because marriage is not simply a romantic endeavor. Yeah, it's also social, it's also legal and economic. Yeah. So often it's about being chosen. Yeah, men, well, religion, culture, all of these systems of power decided what marriage material was for a woman, and men obviously play into that. They have expectations. They have expectations. And so when you're seeing these conversations about what is and what isn't marriage material, you need to be asking these questions. What do you mean by marriage material? And who's deciding what's marriage material? The problem is if you're male-centered and if you are invested in getting married by any means, at any cost, you will actually then buy into what you are being told marriage material actually is. But remember, we're always talking about invisible contracts, the difference between what you're told, what you're promised, and the lived reality. Yes? So when people say that modern women are not marriage material, what they're often expressing is that modern women are less willing to accept certain invisible contracts. This is where the conflict actually arises. Because it's not that most women living today hate marriage. Not everyone. Some women do. And it's not because most women hate men, right? It's because they can see the invisible contracts more clearly. And historically, lots of women entered into marriage because the alternatives were limited. And today, women alive now, current women, modern women, we have alternatives. Yeah, there's lots of other things that women can do other than getting married. And quite frankly, when your whole entire identity and self-worth does not sit within marriage, you're going to choose to do other things if that's what you want to do. Yeah, once alternatives exist, people start to evaluate the invisible contract and the terms that go along with it, right? And like I always say, in reality, most women are a mixture of both anyway. So that's what I wanted to cover because it does annoy me when I see this. Yeah, modern women are not marriage material. Well, what does modern mean? What do we mean by marriage material? And actually, it's not a case of one is better or worse than the other. Yeah. The rise of modern single women is not really about relationships. The kind of angst and the pushback that people have for it, it's not that. It's about power. It's about self-authority. Because my goodness, you see, any human being, but particularly when women claim their authority and they have economic choice and independence, when they have autonomy, it changes society. And so what you're really seeing is a pushback on that power, a pushback on the expression and the demonstration of autonomy. That's why they label you modern, independent, because that's code word for rebellious. That's code word for you're no longer complying with expectations of you as a woman. And you're no longer allowing those expectations to dictate how you see yourself and the choices that you're making. Now, I talk about invisible contracts when it comes to single womanhood and womanhood more generally in the invisible contract audit. You can find the link somewhere in the descriptions.